Hello, welcome. It's been an interesting day. So today we're going to talk a little bit about core energetics, and because I thought that that would be a fun thing to do. And the first thing that I want to talk about really, first of all, core energetics is a system that was started by John Pierrakos. And so he came from the psychoanalytic line. Very interestingly, his wife, Eva Pierrakos, wrote the Pathworks lectures. So she channeled the Pathworks lectures. And so if you haven't had an opportunity to check those out, I've used them a number of different times. I've read a number of those books. I put them into my programs, things like that. I find the material very interesting, healing, catalytic. I don't necessarily agree with all of the perspectives that are always in there. I think that there's a degree of human filter, but I do think that some of the content is really great, especially around relational issues. And the book Pathworks of Transformation is a fun one. So anyway, John Pierrakos from the psychoanalytic line created core energetics. And it is a body-oriented psychotherapy. And so there are certain parts of core energetics that I use really regularly. And one of the tools that was incredibly helpful for me was the understanding of the mask, lower self, core self. So this, which is usually represented like almost like a bullseye, where you have like a layer around the outside that is like the mask. And then below that, you have the lower self. Then inside of that, you have the core self. And so one of the reasons that I really like this is super helpful for people who are studying coaching, who are working with anybody in any kind of capacity, because they start to understand like what they're doing. Like we're trying to bring out the essential nature, the truth of the person. Right? Like that's kind of the purpose of like working with someone, no matter what modality we're using, is that we're trying to help more of them come through, in their life in all the ways. And so that's really the core self. This is the essential being of the person. So when we're working with someone, and some of us have a natural, like I always had this capacity to see people's like their core self. And it was very confusing for me actually, because I would see someone's core self and I would discard the mask and the lower self, especially the lower self. Then I would like be confused by the results of what was happening, by what rolled out from that, because I wasn't paying attention to like what was kind of covering up and how much was covering up that core self. So here we are, any kind of healing work, we're basically looking at how do we get that core to come through more, to be more fully expressed, to be more fully in their life. And then they have these other parts of themselves that are kind of covering. And one of the ways that it's explained is like you have your core self, your expression of your, true nature as a child. And then something happens to that, and then that creates an emotional reaction. And then the emotional reaction is criticized in some way by the environment, and then that creates the mask. So the mask is what we present to the world so that we can be safe, loved, that kind of thing. And so each person comes up with their own ways of adapting to cover up their responses to having their lower self activated. And so therapeutically, we go the opposite direction, right? Like a lot of times the wording is you challenge the mask to bring out the lower self material so that it can be given a healing movement and the person then has more access to their core. So when you look at that, like from this, and this is a therapeutic practice, right? So it needs a certain type of holding. So I don't recommend that you go and you just like poke at people's masks all the time. It's not going to win you friends. But there is a way that when someone's presenting a mask, that if you, instead of engaging it the way that that person is used to being engaged, you allow them to gain access to something deeper, like some kind of feeling or sense of what's deeper, which is ultimately bringing them in the direction of, if a healing movement is there, brings them in the direction of their core self or their deeper self. So in subtle ways, we can actually do this, because the more authentic we are, the more our mask is sort of in sync with our deeper core self. The more that we are, we kind of naturally bring that about in other people. So there is like our authenticity sort of like is a way of actually challenging the mask. And not necessarily because like we're trying to challenge the mask, but that's just what it does. Because when you're authentic with someone who's really inauthentic, really masky, then it sort of like pushes on that. And then we're like, oh, wait a second here, like my tools, my way of sort of like creating my place and feeling safe and secure and loved isn't really working. So now I'm confronted by what else is there. So we do this in our life, right? We just do this naturally as we clarify ourselves. It's something that's going to happen. When we don't engage in these patterns, then it's something that's going to happen. And then it can deliberately be done therapeutically, where it's like, the mask is called out, or the mask is like actually challenged. And that awareness is sometimes really powerful. So in other words, sometimes if you just name what's in the room, it brings awareness. And then that awareness brings a potential shift. So, but it can be very challenging for people when you call them like that, whether you're doing it indirectly or like, you're not really intending, or whether you're doing it intentionally, therapeutically. It's like you've called someone on their game. You know what I mean? And they're like, no, but this is my game that keeps me safe and secure. And so it's like, it requires that there's a lot of trust in order to be able to do something like that effectively. Then underneath this mask, of like our kind of socialized, acceptable, way of being, we have all of these kind of intense emotions, and that we are like running from all the time, that we're kind of like, oh, nope, not going on here, instead of being able to like being willing to like stop and be like, oh, wow, actually, like this is what's going on. This is what I'm feeling right now. And now that I'm an adult, and now that I have the capacity to do this, I'm going to try to work with these emotions differently. Or in a therapeutic context, you help the person to be able to work with those emotions differently. So what's living in this lower self is like all of a buildup of material. And, therapeutically, again, you're assisting with clearing out. As this clearing out happens, there's greater transparency between the core all the way through the mask. There's nothing wrong. We all have a persona. There's nothing wrong with a persona. It's just when our persona is sort of like so kind of thick and calloused and, protective, that's when that it's an issue. So when we clear out, then what happens is that light, the radiant light from our core, starts to shine through. And so that's like one of the ways to think about that is like enlightenment, in a way, like when you start to see that somebody has more vibrancy, more vitality, then it's like that's a symptom of that core being able to actually come through their layers and be more expressed in the world. And so then it gets expressed, the core gets expressed through the mask instead of being sort of like held in by it. And so there's more flow, more energetic flow. So I love this because it's a simple way of understanding ourselves. And it's a simple way of understanding, like, what are we really trying to do here? And like, how can we work at each one of these levels? So like the mask, it's just like, you don't buy into the mask as the core, right? You don't treat it as the core. You don't indulge it when it's a defense that isn't serving the person. You don't really indulge it because that's not really so helpful. The degree to which you confront it, is in relationship to your trust and the person's capacity, and then on the lower self level, you have the healing movement, which is that emotion that's there from the past is able to find its way into expression and a different outcome. So one way to phrase healing or to talk about healing is that it is a different outcome for a painful situation. So when you start getting into that material and as somebody, it's just so if somebody has, let's take anger. Somebody has raged their whole life. They've raged and people have bent over backwards, run away, all of that kind of stuff, some way accommodated the rage. That's what happened. Or someone has never expressed anger in their life or rarely expressed anger in their life. And they've always they've frequently felt shut down and they didn't have a space. So these would be two examples, right? The healing movement in relationship to each of those would be different. So somebody who is rages all the time and people are accommodating and running away, right? That rage might stood for with in the sense of I'm meeting this right now, or it might be kind of that, no, a boundary, no, that has no place for here. Both of those could be healing movements. The one where it's not ever expressed, allowing it to be expressed and held, allowing the person to have their anger and process their anger and run it, would then potentially be a healing movement. So you're looking at how did this particular problem originate? What is the pattern that's here that's been replicated over time? And how can we create an alternative? That is the therapeutic response. What is the alternative? So I remember years ago, this woman saying she had a lot of anger that was moving through her. And she just felt I just want someone to be able, my anger to be okay. And for someone to just be able to stand with it in me, with me. And so we stood up and she in core, you do these physical exercises. So we used the cube and there was hitting, but I just leaned in and held her in eye contact. And we yelled back and forth at each other, and I locked energy with her. And she came away from that oh my gosh, so relieved. She was just thank you. Nobody's been willing to go to that place and meet me in that energy. And so then it was now she has a new relationship to it. Not everything's solved from one occasion. Sometimes that can be the case, but it's now there's a new experience and that new experience can be built on, and it's just so now it's whatever she was internalized around being bad and wrong for having this anger and just really wanting to be able to have it fully, is starts to dissipate. So that's part of where we go in the healing movements. We're looking at what wasn't here that was needed. What was the wound? What was the original wound? Then can be kind of remedied so that it resolves. And there's a very simple level to approach this on, which is that when an emotion is not processed, it's not allowed to be expressed or expressed in its full cycle, because emotions have cycles. So when something doesn't have its full cycle, then it gets trapped. And so core energetics believes that it gets trapped in the body and that we actually liberate this through certain physical movements that help to dislodge the kind of stuck energy. And that in itself, even if we don't kind of go to what's the reason that this pattern is here, that in and of itself has benefit. So you can go through core exercises and start to open up the physical channels or the physicality of the body. And that starts clearing stuff out, which is a very important point when it comes to therapeutic practice, because we often think in terms of healing and helping that in order for something to be resolved, it needs to be processed. And so like we need to know the story and we need to go through the situation. And then as a result of that, we get our relief, which is actually like only a fraction true. But we have a whole industry that's based on it, like, like scholarship and stuff like that. But it's not as true as it's made out to be. So the understanding that emotion and energy can be processed out and needs to be processed out simply physically is really important, because sometimes we don't see progress with a client because they're working on the story, they're working on the understanding, they're working on the mental, and really they just need to detox, essentially. It's just like if you've never run your emotions from since you were an infant, you haven't been able to fully and clearly express your emotions, like you're kind of messed up emotionally. And so you need that space, just like if you had been eating like really horrible food and all of a sudden you were wanting to like get on track, you would need to like probably like cleanse and fast and clear out your system and start eating healthier and that kind of thing. So it's like that. We get to clear out the body and start to move some of this stuff that's going on. And then also that as a tool for everyday life, that sometimes, especially people who are dealing with a lot of emotions, they're very emotional people, they might benefit from more movement. They might benefit from more, especially deliberate movement, so that they get more flow going on. And then that might calm their system. That again, that's not like 100%, but that like getting the stuff to work and get processed through. Same thing that someone may not want movement because they are not wanting to feel something, right? So especially as you start to bring a person more into their body, make them aware of certain parts, like there's certain movements. That's what you can see when the core exercises happen and somebody's hitting or doing some kind of movement, you can sort of see the degree of comfort that there is in that particular movement. And with that sort of tells you a little bit like about what's hidden there, because it's just like in an area that has consciousness and has movement, it's going to be like more dynamic and flexible and all of those things that we associate with health. So when you do that, so if like, for example, like a really like an easy one would be like the pelvis, right? So like many people have pelvic kind of issues and sexually related issues because of the world that we live in, the culture that we live in, all of that kind of stuff. So you see a lot of holding in the pelvic area, where it's uncomfortable, where you take and you let's just like find another, like not Americans, right? Let's go to Brazil. And you're going to see a different relationship to the pelvic structure, but that doesn't mean there isn't restriction in that area, but you're going to see a different relationship, and you're going to see that actually play out in the expression of the people that are able to move that part of their body and they have consciousness around it. So you can see that in an individual circumstance when somebody goes up to do something and they're not aware of some part of themselves. And then simply speaking, like if you're doing like body work with someone, sometimes all you have to do is like bring your attention or your hand or something like that to that area of their body to raise the consciousness in that area, so that then they can start to do their cleansing, clearing, discharge, release process. And it's not actually fancier than that. It can be, more can be done, but it is about helping the person to be able to become conscious, aware, and open in that particular area through whatever means, so you can apply that to talk therapy, you can apply that to coaching, you can apply that to fitness, you can apply that to massage, you can apply it to acupuncture, all of it. So let's see here. So awareness, right? And so we're helping with core energetics and with exercises, or with, physically oriented exercises, helping people sort of like clear out and dislodge these patterns of holding. One of the theories is that when someone comes in and they do talk therapy, but they don't use their body, they can hide a lot from themselves. And that by getting someone to talk and use their body, there's a greater level of transparency that is there. So that's kind of the, like the generals of the work, and kind of like how to use that basic system to be able to understand, like look at working with people. And then like a deeper dive as you start to get into this, like a little bit more, if you study or you receive sessions or whatever, is that the breakdown goes further into specific types of wounds that develop specific types of character structures. So ways of accommodating what it is that happen, and that those character structures show up in our physical selves. So you can, by looking at someone, discern some of their wounding. And people who are very skilled at this are able to like look at various different parts of a person's body and sort of like ask them things, like that you could be like, oh, okay, like I'm looking at your, wrists and ankles right now. And I'm wondering if you had this kind of experience in your life. And so that's a very fascinating process, like a very fascinating like skill to develop, and very interesting area to study if you're working with people's physical bodies, because it adds another dimension of understanding about what's going on with them, and then potential ways that you can adjust what it is that you're offering. So in other words, as you start to understand someone's wounding and character structures, you have an opportunity, you may or may not decide to, but you have an opportunity to then be able to adjust what it is that you're offering. In other words, if like a character type has a difficult time with expression, you might be able to offer more time for expression, even if that's not typically the way that you work. Because it's just like you add in 2 to 3 minutes of just tell me what's going on with you, so that then the person is really like they're getting extra out of the experience, So if you're dealing with somebody that is disassociated, or having a difficult time being present, then you can, understand how to not be too demanding, how to be safe, and how to step the person in the direction of more contact. If you're dealing with somebody that's overly dependent, then you can start to look at how you can start to strengthen them to be able to stand on their own 2 feet and to be able to rely on themselves. And always, with all things that are kind of like this therapeutic healing, one key note inside of it is you're meeting the person, the client, where they are and taking them a little bit further. So in other words, it's just like if you want somebody to be more independent who's struggling with dependence, you can't just 100% be like, this is it. It's just like you're like taking the kid and throwing it in the pool, like kind of thing. It's not like all that. It's just like it's recognizing where the client is and sort of like what would help them, like what would kind of take them that next step. And so that is where you define and refine treatment. An effective intervention is going to be challenging, but not overly so. So the person is going to have the ability to work with it and integrate it. And that looks different at different phases of development. So, someone at a higher degree of development can deal with more disruption. So they're ready for that. but somebody who's maybe just getting started in their development can't deal with that level of disruption. And so it would be a very gentle, bringing in of a new thing. And that's like a very, there's a lot of patience that goes along with that, where it's like somebody, say, you'll stick with the dependency, who's super dependent. That's really their way of being, like just like introducing the idea of like an individual way of being and personal perspective might be the starting place. So that's kind of part of the, it's the way that the character types work, is that you start to understand some of the configuration, the patterning of that type. And then you're able to see how you might be able to create a healing movement, assist in a healing movement for the person. But you have to have access to the problem, which is where you get the challenge the mask to get into the lower self. Because if you just are relating to the mask, if it's just the mask, then you actually can't get in there to that material. They haven't given you access to it. And so you kind of have to it's like a little strategic in a way, because you kind of have to maneuver a little bit to sometimes to get past the mask and start getting into some of the deeper material. And it gets even more tricky when people have more skill. So the more therapeutic practice someone has as a client, right? The more skill that they have, the easier it is for them to, I don't want to say fake it. It's not faking it. It's like managing. It's managing the process. So that is the vulnerability that's not really vulnerability. I mean, it is, but it isn't, and I personally got quite good at this. And, it's just like, and it's like, what, like, I can share that. I can go there. I'll emote. I can do it. You know what I mean? And it's like, but I'm still in charge of the process. Right. And so that's my area of holding. There is still masky, basically. It's like, even if I'm in process. So the therapist needs to be able to challenge that, and find a way to it's not hurting the client. It's finding a way to get past it to kind of what's really going on, so that then that can be addressed. And that, can take time sometimes, or can take a number of different maneuvers. Because again, you can't upset the balance so much that the person just springs off. Then they're just gonna extra mask. So anyway, so you maneuver, you figure out and how to open up this space so that then you can create a healing movement, which is asking the question, what is it that this person needed that they didn't get? Or what is it that they're needing now? And then that helps you see kind of how to bring in that new way. And that's where we start to get really creative, and it can expand beyond that. Whether it's no matter what way you're applying this information, what field, what area you're in, so the creative solutions can look like a number of different things. They can look like a core energetics exercise. They can look like a ritual. They can look like a practice. They can look like a resource. They can look like a hug. It can look like any number of different things that basically allows for a new progression. That's why I use this information all the time. And I'll wrap here and see if there are any questions, but that's why I use this information all the time, because you can see how simple the system is and how versatile the system is. So it really allows you to see a lot just by simply looking at those three different dimensions, and how to work with each one of them. So I teach it to almost everybody along the way, because of the fact that it helps us understand ourselves, and it helps us in our working with other people. And then we just deepen that process or that understanding through starting to look at the character types. That can be further developed in the energetic sense by going in through Barbara Brennan's work, because Barbara Brennan was a student of John Pierrakos and built off of his work. So if you want to like expand, like there's different pathways, and the kind of energetic body-oriented pathway is Barbara Brennan opened up. Okay, let's wrap this up. Thank you for coming and for asking your questions, and I will talk to you soon.